Hi everyone. Hope you're all doing safe and well today. To start off, wishing you all a very happy Ganesh Chaturthi. I'm Sakshi Soi, founder of Provis Learning and Consulting. And today I have the opportunity to host Mr. Nitin Kaul for our second session of the L&D Summit. Hi Nitin.
Hello. Happy Ganesh Chaturthi to all your viewers and listeners, and to you also.
To you too. I hope you had a wonderful day starting off based out of Mumbai. It's a big festival in Maharashtra.
Yeah, a little subdued today, but otherwise, yes, it is important for Maharashtra this festival. And yeah, it's been kind of busy day for all of us out here, but that's how it is.
I can imagine. Thank you so much for making time today on the day of a festival.
You're
All right,
welcome.
I will quickly give an introduction about you to our viewers and also introduce the theme for the day. Nitin is currently heading the learning and development arm at Reliance Retail. So every growth-oriented organization has an L&D arm that works towards upskilling and cross-skilling the workforce to kind of help them grow in their professional front. Nitin himself comes with over 32 years of experience across industries, diverse industries that he's worked in. And his tenures have been focused on organizational development and culture. Nitin, with your experience in growth oriented organizations, like you're currently with Reliance Retail today, and even before this, you've been with Future Group India and RPG and a lot of more prominent names worldwide. We figured we would exclusively focus on the role of L&D as an enabler for strategic business goals.
Sure. Yeah.
So that would be the theme for the discussion today. And to get
Absolutely.
started, the first area that we would want to kind of understand from you or your thoughts on is, let's say L&D is not exactly an end all be all of strategic expansion or scale up decisions, but it definitely plays a vital role, right, in fostering confidence in the leadership to take such decisions, in easing the transitions between teams, and the entire human side essentially of such strategic decisions. What's your take on how L&D goes hand in hand with all such major business changes?
Okay. So I will take one step back and talk about business strategy. Okay, what is business strategy? So you, as an organization, the what is identified through a process is their strategic advantage. What is it that sets an organization apart from its competitors, which will have values in the eyes of the customer? It will have a value, and it is something that is so unique that it cannot be replicated by the competitors. That's the strategic advantage. Based on that, the organization then decides on how it is going to use that strategic advantage to make profits, right? Now, any strategy that an organization decides on uh, is not worth anything unless that organization has the capability of executing that strategy, right? And execution of a strategy has two components. One is the people who are working within the organization, do they have the requisite skill sets and the capabilities to do the job that is required to execute the strategy? And the second part is, does the organization have a requisite culture which enables the execution of that strategy?
Right.
Okay. And both of them fall in the domain of this entire so-called function called learning and development. So are the people ready in terms of their skill sets, in terms of their capabilities? And does the organization have the requisite culture? Both come under the purview of the learning and development function. So while I'm talking about under the purview, the function itself plays the role of enablers. Okay. So typically, any good progressive organization, the learning and development function is the custodian of the culture and the value system of the organization, because that's important for the execution of the strategy. Okay. Okay?
Right.
So making sure that the culture, the requisite culture is sustained in the company and it grows in the organization and everybody within the company understands that culture,
Hmm.
practices that culture, becomes the responsibility of the learning and development function. And then,
Hmm.
of course, the obvious function of making sure that the people have the requisite skills to execute that strategy.
Right.
So that's how learning and development as a function partners with the business.
So, if we were to, let's say, just following up on learning culture, right? If we were to speak to the learning and development professionals saying, hey, how do you build a culture that's learning centric? How do you build an environment that is that enables a learning culture or knowledge transfer in a positive fashion? A lot of times people misunderstand that a bigger L&D function is equal to a learning centric culture.
No, in fact, ideally, there should not be a learning and development function in an organization.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, and that will happen only when the organization, as you describe it, has that learning culture, where
Hmm.
there is a desire for people to learn. And let's understand, okay, let me go back again and look at the context of the individuals working in the company.
Okay.
All of us, without exception, have a need to learn. Okay, and we have a constant process of learning
Hmm.
as we go through in life. So it is wrong to say that people need to be driven to learn. The question there is, are you providing the right learning inputs to the individual that the person requires?
Hmm.
Okay, and that is where you create and sustain a learning culture. And that is again the function, the L&D function is not the function that drives this piece. It's the organization as a whole, starting from the CEO of a company who drives this kind of a culture. So two things: one, do we give the requisite um, space for the individuals to learn? Do
Hmm.
we provide the right content for people to learn? Do we encourage people to learn?
Hmm.
Okay, and do we use that learning to the benefit of the organization?
Right.
Right, so that's the process. And no, L&D function can only be an enabler up to a certain point. So as a function, we can look at making sure that the content is available. We can make sure that the space is created, and that's
Hmm.
about it.
Hmm.
Right, beyond that, it is the organization as a whole which drives learning.
Hmm.
Right, and like I said, the culture does not get formed by the L&D function. Like
Right.
any other organization culture, the culture gets formed at the top. That's the CEO of the company, and that's or the senior leadership, to use a better word. So the senior leadership drives the culture,
Hmm.
and as the senior leadership who decide what the culture of the company should be.
True. I think it gets set at a very early stage of an organization when they start at the time of inception as they keep growing and scaling up in their line of business or market and so on. Very interesting one point. Yeah, sorry, you were saying something.
No, please go ahead.
So
Yeah,
one very interesting point that you spoke of was there's this much that an L&D function can do, right? In terms of enabling, you provide content, you create space for them, and you make sure that every resource that's required is available to the participants or the employees, the workforce.
please.
How do you see co-ownership in this case, like business unit heads and L&D heads co-owning such learning projects or initiatives? Because at the end of the day, there is a requirement in the organization, and you backtrack from there saying, okay, we're going to conduct a training for this, or this is one of the best methodologies to upskill or cross-skill our employees. So, how do you see co-ownership between business heads and L&D heads?
So it kind of stems out of that question of what is in it for me. Okay,
Okay.
so as a business head, um, there's a pressure on a business head to deliver a certain output.
Hmm.
Okay, and or he or she has a set of people who enable that output.
Right.
Now, it is always in that business head's interest to make sure that the people who are working under them have the requisite skills to give that output. Now, it can work both ways. Either the business head talks about what are the skill sets that are required to deliver the output and what is lacking within their team, or it works the other way where the function, the L&D function, walks up to the business head and says, this is your output, this is what your team is like, this is what we feel is the skill sets, here is the gap, and I think if we fill the gap, this is the kind of output that can be delivered.
Hmm.
So it
Right.
works both ways. The important thing is, and something that a lot of people in this function of learning and development miss out, is how good an understanding of the business do you have? Okay, do you have that ability to step out of the function and say, here are the business imperatives, here are the business challenges, this is the kind of skill sets that are available, here is the gap. Now, do I have the confidence to walk up to the business head and say, this is my study, this is my understanding, you tell me what do you understand, let's come to a common ground and let's look at how do we upskill our people, right? So it works that way, and that's where the co-ownership would come in. At the end of the day, it is, does the business head feel that a particular development input will actually and really improve my business output?
Hmm.
The moment an L&D function person is able to convey that, obviously it will, the business head, it will be very natural for the business head to take up the ownership of, say, I will drive it because it is going to reflect on my numbers.
Right.
Right. So that's how it will work. So at the end of it, like I said, it's all about what is in it for me.
Yeah. So, from what is in it for a business unit head or a business to kind of, invest that kind of time? Because it is a cost to invest time in terms of sending your professionals or your workforce in for a training in any format, whichever is available. There is a new concept of ROI that we've just started working towards in general in the L&D function across different industries in India, but it's
Hmm.
not established yet, right? Like you said, to understand what's in it, what's in a training program for the business unit head, I believe an ROI aspect will be very important. If you could share your thoughts on this or elaborate on the ROI function and how that translates today.
So let me address the first part, which is the cost part. Okay.
Yeah.
And you did talk about training programs.
Mm.
More and more, in our experience in the L&D function, we have now started to realize that classroom training probably is the most inefficient way to deliver training. Okay. And yeah, people come in, they attend the session. There is a certain amount of retention if your module and your delivery is great, but to what extent does it translate into improved action at the workplace is a question mark.
Hmm.
Okay, and till a long time, the only way to deliver training was, or the major way to deliver training was thought to be classroom training.
Right.
But more and more, we have come to realize that uh, probably we need to look at other avenues of training. Okay, so
Mhm.
on the job training is becoming pretty popular. One other way of doing it, and what is happening and it is really catching on, is something called peer to peer learning. Okay.
Right.
And what we have realized is that individuals within the organization have a lot of wealth of knowledge, skills, and information. Okay. How do we enable that individual to share it with the peer group or the colleagues within the organization? Now, that becomes a very cost effective
Hmm.
way of people learning, and people learn better through that process because it's just a friend talking to another friend kind of a situation, or a colleague talking to another colleague, like we do amongst friends. We pick up a whole lot of things from our friends in courses of conversation,
Absolutely.
but that's also a learning process,
Hmm.
right? So classroom training today is not the most ideal way of learning. Today we have come to accept that. Okay. Now coming to the second part, which is ROI. Um, Again, it comes back to the same thing that we talked in your earlier question of what is in it for me. Okay, so let me give you an example. In our organization, we have a system where we have stores, okay, various stores, and a store comprises of a store manager. Then you have various departments within the store. So you have department managers, then you have the customer sales agents, the CSAs working down the at the store at the basic level. And typically, a medium-sized store would have anything between 35 to say 50, 60 people working, right? Now, at the end of the day, what is business looking at is not in terms of what is the contribution that an individual is giving into that particular business. Amongst the 60 people in a store, we are not interested in what each one of them is doing.
Right.
We are looking at what is the store making. Is it making profits? Is it not making profits? Is it keeping its cost low? Okay, is the employee turnover within reasonable limits? So there are certain parameters that are there on which we judge the health of a store. Okay, um, and today what we do is so our entire training therefore becomes geared towards checking out these parameters, right? So if you are talking about profitability, for example, in a store, then we would give training to the people in the store, which talks about how to increase your profitability. So
Right.
how to upsell, how to do cross selling, how to interest a customer into looking at other options, so on and so forth. If it comes to about cost saving, then we look at how do you do inventory management. Okay, how do you move slow moving items on the shelf, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's a collective input that we are giving to a store, not to an individual in the store. And we are monitoring a collective output from the store in terms of the parameters that have been defined.
That's very
Okay?
interesting.
And therefore, it is easy for us to calculate the return on our training investment. Right. So
Okay.
you know that before we started doing training for this store, these were the scores on those parameters. Then we give training inputs. We did it for a period of 3 months. We checked it out for 3 months and then did a study of those parameters again. Where did the needle move? And that gives us what is the impact of training on the business of that particular store. So it is
Okay.
not necessary to do it at an individual level. It can also be done at a collective level. And if you really apply your mind, I think every business will have that kind of an opportunity to check the return on investment of training.
Right.
And I believe it's a good thing to do because the whole credibility of this function gets a boost if you are able to show to the business that, hey, look, this is the improvement that your business has made because of the training that has been given. Yeah,
Okay, that's
and
very
it
interesting.
is workable.
Yeah.
Don't The idea is not to look at the conventional models.
Right.
Look at what might be suitable for a particular business where you're working, and look at what kind of a model will be suitable there. And I'm sure you can pick up those parameters in every business to monitor and see how training is going to make an impact on those parameters.
True. I think we have the key metrics or KPIs across all industries, all departments, right? And those are what will function as your return on what you would base your return on investment calculations on. And I think that's a very interesting perspective, Nitin,
Hmm.
because through a lot of discussions, and of course, several training programs that either I've been part of or conducted, there's been a lot of focus on each individual participant's performance and not so much on the collective benefit.
At the end of the day, the way I look at it and the way it works for us is at the end of the day, what are we looking at for as business health or business performance is a
Right.
collective. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And why are we then looking at individual? Because what is going to happen is if you are focusing on the collective output, then it becomes the responsibility of the leadership of that collective to pull up the team together. Because at the end of the
Yes.
day, that leadership's output depends on the performance of the team. So let that individual manage the team. You focus on the collective. See, the
Interesting.
problem with ROI is we get caught up in complexities.
Yes.
Okay, but if we are able to keep it simple,
Hmm.
there is a method of calculating the ROI on training.
Hmm.
You don't have to be absolutely so accurate that you're going to calculate the ROI for each and every individual. That will not help. I mean, why do you want to do it in the first place? The
Right.
balance sheet is a collective balance sheet of the entire company. You don't do it for individuals. Then why are you
So
focusing on the ROI for individuals? Do it on a larger scale. It becomes simpler.
very interesting, because I think when we get stuck up with individual performance, or the results on training performance for each single member, we tend to miss out the actual business goals that we are conducting the training for.
Sorry,
Okay.
I couldn't hear that.
I was just
I
repeating what you said because it was excellent
oh, okay.
insight.
Okay.
Yes. Just
Thank you.
summarizing that. Um,
Okay.
there's another debate that occurs very often, which is on the speed at which we can deliver, especially when we talk about big decisions or strategic decisions like entering a new market, or maybe bringing in a technology to change how a particular process is running, and you need to, or the L&D function needs to conduct training for that, right? How rapidly can we turn around and conduct those kind of trainings to make sure that people are upskilled and are able to implement those at the earliest? So there are huge debates around the speed at which it happens.
Well, the best example of speed is what happened once the lockdown was announced.
Yes.
Okay, so we were all used to a certain way of working, and then the lockdown was announced, and then suddenly overnight everybody started working from home.
Hmm.
Right now, that required a lot of reorientation of the people. That required a lot of training of people of how to manage working from home because um, most of us, or almost all of us, don't have that kind of experience. For us, in
Absolutely.
our minds, home and office are two separate things.
Yes.
And now suddenly the whole thing merged. So, at an individual level, as a professional, as an employee, how do you balance these two dimensions of home and office?
Hmm.
Required skilling. I mean, I'm giving an example at a very basic level, but just to highlight this point. So, it all depends on the need. And we were
Hmm.
able to do it very fast.
Yes.
And the speed at which we did this orientation and this reorientation and skilling,
Hmm.
I think talks about how quickly can we do it. The question is, what is the need and how urgent is that need, right? So if so, there's or sometimes there is a lot of gap between what is said and what is.
Hmm.
So if the business say we need this yesterday,
Yeah.
in all probabilities they don't. So and you can understand that, and therefore you go slow. But when it comes to a crunch and there is a need for that speed, yeah, you do it,
Yeah.
and we have done it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I don't think that is really an issue.
Yeah, that's a very relevant point, because there
In
was no
fact, if I
yes.
give an example of how this was just example at the very basic level, I'll take it to another level.
Hmm.
Um, so in the retail business, the stores which were brick and mortar, where people used to walk into the store and buy stuff,
Right.
suddenly couldn't do that anymore. So they had to reorient themselves to do home deliveries, for example.
Right.
Okay, and overnight, a lot of these businesses who were pure brick and mortar converted themselves into e-commerce.
That's
It
true.
was practically overnight. The websites of these companies came up so fast and then you had people who were managing those websites. They were managing the orders. Another
Hmm.
set of people who were delivering stuff to people at home.
Yeah,
Uh, it was because um, it was a matter of survival. Therefore, speed happened.
absolutely.
So it's a need based thing. So if there is a need, and that need is dire enough, then the speed of delivery will also be equally fast.
That's very interesting and very relatable at this point of time, because we remember using a few platforms that were e-commerce who couldn't pull up to the required speed, and then you shift,
Yeah,
you move to another platform because you have so much competition today.
yeah.
And very interesting that you talk about COVID, right? Before COVID, we had like a blend of different ways to learn and upskill and deliver content. You spoke about peer-to-peer learning. You spoke about on-the-job training. You also spoke about using videos or other formats of content to deliver, and not just in class. In fact, in class is something that's slowly taking the back seat. Uh, but with the hit of COVID, we've practically gone online completely, 100%. It's digital. How do you see the impact of that on this, collective learning process?
So I'm going to divide the entire learning population into two groups. One is people the youngsters who are, and when I say youngsters, I'm talking about 35 and below, okay,
Okay.
uh, who are very tech friendly. I wouldn't say tech savvy, but tech friendly, okay,
Hmm.
because a lot of their social interactions also is technology driven.
Right.
And for them to adapt to a completely digital learning process was far more simpler,
Hmm.
provided we as a learning and development function were able to make it interesting enough.
Hmm.
Okay? So that was one part. The other part was the older people who, in the course of their careers, have been more used to the another form of learning, which is classroom training, strictly on the job training, and so on and so forth. Uh, for them, see, okay, so it was a little difficult. Okay, and the reason is twofold. One, uh, for us, when we went to a classroom, it
Hmm.
was not just a learning session;
Hmm.
it was a social interaction also. Okay, um, every time there was a break, whether there was a tea break, there was a lunch break, people met, they interacted with each other, and therefore you build your network during those classroom sessions,
Right.
right? And then so and then you move completely to a digital learning kind of a platform, which is a very lonely process. It's just
True.
you and your laptop in front of you. Okay, and that transition was a little difficult. So and that is where we realize that peer-to-peer learning is very important, because then you are able to maintain a certain level of social interaction amongst the people. At the same time, you're also fostering learning amongst people. So peer-to-peer learning therefore became so much more important.
Hmm.
The second was the transition from, so while keeping the essence of a classroom training there, you move it digitally through a virtually instructor-led training. So thanks to platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and so on and so forth, we have been able to give that semblance of a classroom training to people to a
Hmm.
certain extent, and then get that feel that you're still learning in a group, and you have breakout rooms and you give them time for their own interaction also, and that helps.
Hmm.
But yeah, broadly speaking, the two groups have moved in two different ways towards digital learning.
Makes sense. And how's the impact on the facilitators? As a facilitator, there are so many different tools that we used in class to engage, to impart learning, to see the application during the session itself.
Yeah. So see, my experience as a trainer. Okay, so when you stand up in front of a classroom, your participants, over a period of time, you get that experience of picking up body language.
Right.
And then you know that who is interested in what is happening, who is tuned off, how do you bring it, and you use various techniques to get the whole class to participate and get involved in that session.
Hmm.
And so, in my own case, I had a team of trainers who were excellent classroom trainers. Okay, and
Right.
they had years of experience, and they do a brilliant job of delivering training in a classroom. And then suddenly, when you put them through a virtual instructor-led training kind of a session, there was um, they didn't know how to handle it because they couldn't see the participants, or there was that activity and picking up those signals was
No.
very difficult.
Yeah.
So we had to put them through a training process to get them to understand how do you handle virtual classroom sessions.
Hmm.
Okay, how do you involve participants into discussions? How do you get the people involved? And there's a whole transition that has happened. And one
Hmm.
of the most important thing that um, we realized is that when you're doing a virtual training session, um, storytelling becomes a very important mode of communication because we all love stories.
Yes.
And that's an excellent way to hold people's attention and also deliver a message.
Hmm.
So we had to teach our trainers how to do storytelling, how to pick up stories that are relevant to a particular topic, and how do you deliver stories to a virtual session and all. So yeah, there has been a lot of transition and reskilling of trainers also that has happened.
That's interesting. So, um, we can also say that the skill sets required from facilitators also might see a change, during these unprecedented times. And also over the last decade, if we see, it's entirely changed. Where earlier the requirement was that you should be able to facilitate in a class, today it's entirely different. You should be a little more tech savvy. You should be able to understand data. You need to be able to understand, your business requirements and so on and so forth. How do you see the shift or the entire change in a trainer's, profile or requirement, the job in itself?
At the core, nothing changes much because lockdown or no lockdown, COVID or no COVID, uh, I always believe that it's important for a learning and development person to know the business for which she is operating, okay, and have a complete and a more detailed understanding of that particular business. Because if you want to make an impact, you need to understand the business, you need to understand the roles that people are performing, challenges that people have. So that fundamentally does not really change.
Hmm.
What has changed is just the mode. I mean, I remember one of the things we were discussing amongst ourselves, the trainers community of the organization, we were talking amongst ourselves.
Hmm.
And one of them actually brought up this thing and said, you know what? The most difficult and embarrassing time is when you lose connectivity,
Right.
okay, and you don't know what to do. Right now, that's a problem that's real that they never faced before. Okay,
Hmm.
when you were in a classroom, you never lost connectivity, but that possibility is always there. So how do you do a recovery there?
Right.
So how do you handle that? How do you make sure that people have not lost the interest in the interim period?
Hmm.
So these are the skills, and we are also discovering. We don't know exactly 100% what is it. This is something very new to all of us.
Hmm.
And as we go along, we're also learning the process. We are also learning how to do things. But what we understand so far is the challenge is technology. How do we manage with the new technology?
Right.
Um, you know, and it's easy also at the same time it's difficult. Easy, I know of people who keep a complete script on their right side and they know exactly what to speak. You couldn't do that in a classroom session,
True.
but they can do it virtually, right? So that's the good part. But the next part is, how do you balance between when you're talking and there's a presentation, and you also have to keep an eye on what people are commenting. Somebody raises their hand virtually and says, I want to ask a question. How do you keep your eye on all that? Is a difficult thing. That is a skill that we'll have to learn, right? So we're
Absolutely.
also discovering in the process what is the new things that are coming.
Hmm.
But I personally believe that at the core, what is important at the core doesn't change. That still remains.
Interesting. I think towards the closing, since we've spoken about, how L&D functions as an enabler for strategic decisions, moved into the new skill sets that one might require and how we're battling the challenges that COVID has put in front of us. How do you
Mhm.
see L&D job landscape changing going forward? Given that it is definitely a support center or a cost center, which delivers on ROI, but we are still struggling to figure out how to, identify those areas. How do you see the jobs in this particular arm or function hit because of COVID?
Um, the way I look at it, I don't see the function being hit, because this function, if nothing, it has actually gained importance in this current scenario. Because and it all depends on the individuals within um, the function. Okay, uh, a lot of people have talked to me about the function having a very low credibility amongst the business people,
Hmm.
and that people in business don't consider the learning and development function important enough, or they are given the last preference. If there are cost cuts, the first cost cut is happens on the L&D budget, so on and so forth. And while yes, it's a fact, but I also hold the L&D function people responsible, equally responsible for this,
Mhm.
because we as a function perhaps have failed in our duty to show the importance of our contribution to the business. Okay, it's not enough to deliver programs.
Right.
Okay, it's not enough. At the end of the day, a business head is looking at. He's not interested in what you are doing. He's interested in, at the end of whatever you are doing, how does it impact my business?
True.
And if it is a positive impact, and we as L&D function are able to show that positive impact, I don't think any business head in his right mind is going to say, no, I don't want learning or I don't want training. But that
Right.
effort has to come from us. Okay, the effort has to come from us. Now, retail business, of which I am a part,
Right.
um, learning and development is not a support function. Learning and development in retail is part of operations, business operations,
Oh, wow.
because it's a very clear cut understanding that if you don't have good trained people with the right skill sets in a store, your store will not run. If you don't have the right people, your store will not open in the first place.
That's
So
true.
it becomes the responsibility of the operations head and the business head to make sure that people within their team do get the right inputs for the right skill sets. Now,
Hmm.
and I don't see any reason why this kind of an arrangement cannot happen in any other business.
True.
I don't think this is exclusive to the retail business. At the end of the day, you need the right skill sets to deliver what you are setting out to deliver in business. And the right skill sets, you have two options. One is you buy, which means you hire the trained people from outside, or you
Hmm.
develop them inside. Right? You hire, the cost of hiring is, it's quite prohibitive today.
Yeah.
So isn't it better for the businesses to train their own people so that those people deliver what is required?
Hmm.
Again, it is in terms of how the L&D function is able to communicate to the business about what their contribution can be. And
Hmm.
that can only happen if you understand the business. But
True.
if you are going to limit yourself into a silo of learning and development alone, it's not going to work.
Okay, that's. I think with every response you're giving, there's a new question that pops to my head. So you spoke about how you need to have an understanding about the business, right? A lot of focus when we are hiring in the L&D teams is given to people who started off their journey as a trainer and have continued in the training department itself. So how does one upskill themselves to understand the granular?
I lost, I lost the question. Can you repeat it? Your voice went blank for.
Sure. So I was talking about, a training person or a personnel in the L&D function, the need to have an understanding of the business and of skill sets required to facilitate a right session, an engaging session, right? Um a lot of importance when we are hiring in the L&D department itself is given to somebody who started off as a trainer, has been a trainer, has been continuously upskilling themselves in the training domain alone, right? And not so much to somebody who's coming with a background of a particular industry or a particular operations department or the sales department and so on and so forth. So how do we strike that balance when we are either recruiting or we are upskilling our trainers themselves in the business that the company is into?
So I can only give my own example. Out of the 32 years of work experience, only 2 years have been, oh no, about 4 years have been in the learning and development function. The remaining part of my experience has been in pure HR operations, industrial relations, and that area. And there was a time when even I thought that L&D is a waste of time.
Hmm.
Okay, because they don't understand anything about the organization or the business. They just come up with those training programs, and for us, it was like we've been working too hard. We want a break, and therefore, let's call these guys and ask them to deliver a program. We'll go offsite. We'll spend half a day in training, and the rest of the day we'll spend partying. Okay? But it's just that in the last 4 5 years, when I have completely moved into the learning and development functions, I have realized that I have been wrong.
Hmm.
The criticality of this function is very important to the success of any business, actually.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the L&D people have to make that effort. See, for me, the advantage was because I was not a professional trainer. I could sit down and ask some very fundamental and very stupid questions. I mean, to the L&D, my own team, those questions would seem very stupid because I used to ask very basic questions.
Great.
Uh, and so asking those basic questions helped. And I think the reverse will also work if these people walk up to the business people and say, "Hey, I don't know really how our business operates. Can you help me?" I don't think anybody is going to say, "No, get lost. I don't want to teach you."
True.
Uh, because at the end of it, it's a symbiotic relationship. You are dependent on each other. So understanding each other is the foundation of that business. So as L&D professionals, we have to make that effort. Okay. Um, and I think my understanding of that came from the HR function from which I worked. So I have worked across industries.
Hmm.
I have worked in hospitality. I have worked in manufacturing companies. I have worked in logistics companies. And retail, of course, I have worked. And as a consultant, I have interacted with 30 different companies. Uh, at every stage, the initial effort has always been to understand the business. Because if I don't understand the business, or I don't understand the people within that business, what do they do? How do they do it? What are the challenges that they face? I can never be an effective HR or an L&D person.
True.
I so all of us in this function need to make that effort.
Very interesting. It takes me back to the time when I started off, because my initial experience was more from project management in the data analytics field. Moved into L&D and started off with some very basic questions about training kaise karna hai.
When I started my career, I joined as a management trainee in Indian hotels.
Oh wow.
Okay, that's how. And the first 3 months,
Hmm.
I actually worked in hotel operations. I was forced to work in kitchens. I had never seen a kitchen. I had entered but never worked in a kitchen ever in my life before that. I worked with the housekeeping department. I learned to make beds, clean the toilets. I worked in the front office, taking luggage of the customer, the guests to their rooms. Um, and it was important for us because I remember my boss telling me this, that if you don't understand when that guy in the kitchens is standing in front of a stove which is at 400 degrees, and if you don't feel that heat, you will never be able to solve his problems.
Yes.
Yeah, and you need to do. And I have always believed that, maybe I'm a little old-fashioned in that context, but I always believe that if you're part of the learning and development or the HR or any of those functions, support functions, so called, if you don't understand what that person is doing and what that person is going through,
Hmm.
you will not be able to help that person.
That's that's a very well stated fact, indeed. I think that's
Yeah.
one aspect we tend to sometimes miss out. And like you said, sometimes a lot of trainers or L&D also has to take up the onus or the responsibility for it to
Yes,
know what is required and what the pain points are, and eventually deliver the kind of value that is expected.
absolutely.
Excellent. It's been a wonderful discussion, Nitin. We have a lot of uh, comments, appreciation from our viewers over here. I'll pull up a few questions that we have.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Murli Sonder is asking about how, Reliance Retail is also getting into a bigger game of e-commerce, and in general, the workforce, is absorbing millennials and Gen Z today. So, what are the new strategies to fire up the L&D program?
Ah, so let's understand, for this one needs to understand how the nature of workforce itself is changing, and it's got nothing to do with taking on the large players or anything. Any organization, I believe, needs to understand this change that is happening. Okay? So you have two ends of the spectrum. You
Hmm.
have one end of the spectrum, which is what has been described in this question as the Generation Z. Okay,
Yeah,
the youngsters, the millennials who are now joining the workforce, they have a completely different set of aspirations. They have completely different set. Their entire definition of career and career growth is completely different, right?
true.
So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is that um, people are working for a longer number of years.
Hmm.
So today, 58 or 60 is no longer considered as a retirement age. People want to work longer than that, and people do work longer than that. Okay, so now people are even working up to 70 years of age. So you have this wide spectrum of people, and there is a group of people who say, okay, what we are today calling as the gig workers.
Hmm.
So you come, you work for a specific assignment or a project or a particular workforce, and you move on.
Hmm.
And you don't stick to a single organization, and you keep hopping depending on where your interest lies and where your skill sets are matching with another company's requirement. You
Hmm.
complete the assignment and you move on. And then there you have the other end of the spectrum, which is talking about factors like organizational loyalty. They're talking about long tenures in the organization and so on and so forth. So you have come to a stage, and you can't exist as a business without either of them.
You're right.
It's not just the millennials and Gen Z uh, that is the issue. The issue is here is a wide spectrum of people who are there in the workforce. How do you get them together and work as a team and work effectively? That is the
Right.
challenge. Okay, and each organization, I think, will have to find a solution for themselves. There is no, cookie cutter kind of a solution on this. So each organization, depending on their culture, depending on their abilities, and the kind of business that they have, will have to find a solution for this.
True, true. I think within one region now we have a multicultural existence with because of the generation or multi-generational existence in fact.
Absolutely.
True.
Yeah.
So the second question that we have is how the earnings or the revenue have been hit due to the reorientation today after COVID in the new normal. How do we restore the earning potential with L&D as a function working on it?
Uh, uh, a lot depends on the ability of the organization to quickly identify what are the changes in the skill sets required now.
Hmm.
Because, yeah, um, while we hope that things at some stage will go back to what they were in the pre-COVID era,
Right.
the fact remains that it will not happen. Even if we get rid of this pandemic and all that,
Hmm.
the way working has changed. In my mind, I think this is going to continue
Hmm.
because if today organizations have learned that they can effectively work out of home, and in fact, I was talking to some of my friends who are in different organizations, and they tell me that productivity has actually improved when people are working from home. So if organizations have realized that, then the next question is, why do you need office space?
Right.
Right. So the way that of working has undergone a change, and that change is likely to stay. Now, it all depends on how quickly does an organization identify the new skill sets that are required, and therefore how quickly is the organization able to impart those skill sets
Hmm.
and make the workforce effective and productive again.
Right.
Right. And this, I guess, a lot of the traditional organizations will have this problem
Hmm.
because over years there is a way of working that we have come to get used to, and
Hmm.
that suddenly changed not because you wanted the change, because the environment wanted this change. I had this very I used to talk about the VUCA world in a lot of my training programs.
Hmm.
And I could sense from the participants here, people saying, yeah, we understand what you are saying. There is volatility, there is uncertainty, and all this is there, everything is there, but it really does not impact me.
Yeah.
For us in our organization, things are like they were before, nothing much has changed.
Hmm.
And then suddenly in March, you really got the full impact of what VUCA world is all about.
True.
And it left almost all of us gasping for breath. But now it is time for organizations to quickly regroup and find out, okay, what has changed? And
Yeah.
therefore, what are the new skill sets that are required and how quickly can we impart those skill sets? That is going to be the challenge. And I think that is the only way survival is possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very interesting. Nitin, it's been an excellent, excellent discussion for all of us, and a
Thank you.
lot of comments, a lot of positive inputs from our viewers as well today. And for me, as an L&D professional, a lot to learn.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me there. And it was a pleasure interacting. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, Nitin. Thank you so much for being here, for making time. And thanks a lot to all our viewers for making time today. We really hope you enjoyed the session. And stay tuned for our next week, 29th of August. We are also hosting the third session of the L&D Summit. Thank you.
Thank you.